I posted a poll on my channel a few days ago asking if you guys wanted to see me make any tier lists, and if so, which ones you'd want to see most. And the overwhelming majority absolutely want to see tier lists, and the favorite option was to see me rank every self and indie pub book I've read. And that list is at 47. So this video is going to take a while to go through. Now, I did decide if a book was self-published but then picked up by a publisher, I'm not going to include that. And for Michael J. Sullivan, since he bounced around between self-pub and traditionally published, I decided if any part of the series or sub-series was traditionally published, I wouldn't include it. So with all that said, let's get started. So the first book, Sword of Cayenne, I'm going to move this up to A. This was one of the first self-published books I've read. It has some really great character moments and some of the most emotional scenes I've read, but the pacing was a bit weird at times, and the tie-in to her other series didn't work for me, and that's what's keeping it from being S tier. Alright, the next three books, Cradle. I actually wasn't a fan of the Cradle books. I gave it 3 tries because I was told if you don't like it after the third book, then you're allowed to DNF the series. So I can see why other people would like it, but it's not for me. So I'll put it at the C category. Superpowered, Year 1. I will move that up to A. And Year 2 is going to go up to S tier. So Year 1 was the first book that Drew Hayes published. I have a review for that up already, so if you're interested, go check out the review. Superpowered Year 2 just basically improved on everything from Year 1, and what I hear the series gets better, so I'm looking forward to it. Hello World, Michael J. Sullivan. That's a solid book. I'm going to put it at B tier. It's a sci-fi book, which I'm not usually a big fan of sci-fi, but I do really like Sullivan's writing style, and that's what keeps it at a B. I was interested, just never really hooked. And then for Nolyn and Farilane, those are also going to be B's, but I'm going to put those at the top of B. Hello World's going to end up being towards the bottom of the B category. Farilane was one of the more emotional books I read, but it was really only emotional at the end. It's very much a character-driven story, so there wasn't that much plot for most of it. And the emotions, again, don't hit until the end, so that's keeping it from being higher ranked for my own personal preferences. Nolyn, I can't really put into terms what's holding it back from being S or A tier. It just felt kind of average to me, so it's going to end up in B. All right, the next series was Threadlight. Voice of War, I'll put in the B category. Stones of Light, that's going to be A tier. And Bonds of Chaos, I'll put that in B as well. Voice of War was a solid book to me. I thought there were some structural issues, but for the most part, it was fine. Stones of Light really showed me how good self-published books could be. And then Bonds of Chaos, that book just had too many moments where it just either didn't make sense or it was just don't ask too many questions, just go with it moments. Up next is The Villain's Code. This is another Drew Hayes series, and just like Superpowers, I'm going to put the first book in A tier and the second book in S tier. Let's actually rearrange those. I absolutely love both of those books, and Forge and Confess, this is another one. I have a review out, so if you're interested, go check out the review. The Iron Crown. This will go at the top of A tier. May end up rearranging this at some point, but for now it's going to start at the top. This was one I was hooked right from the beginning and just loved every moment of reading it. I felt it was lacking in action scenes where anytime there would be a battle or a fight, a lot of times it just cut to the end or ended really quickly. And that was my big criticism, or my only real criticism of the book. And that's what's keeping it from S tier. Next book is His Ragged Company by Rance D. Denton. This will be at the bottom of the A tier. This is a fantasy western that promises like nothing you've read before, and I've said this several times, but the main character is not a fantastical being in a very fantastical world. So he doesn't see any of the magic that's happening around him, or he ignores it until he can no longer keep his eyes closed to it, and the magic just comes flooding in and hits you like a tidal wave. The next series is the Spellslinger series by Drew Hayes, and this has 3 books. NPCs, let's go right here. Split the Party and Going Rogue. NPCs was a fun story that really twists some tropes or biases we usually have with fantasy creatures. And Split the Party, I just felt like it lost a little bit of the charm, but still a solid book. And then Going Rogue, this was the first book in the series that really kept me hooked. Now to Ryan Cahill's series, The Bound and the Broken, starting with the Blood and Fire, that is going to go into B tier. What was holding this back is too similar to Aragon. Again, I have a review for this up, so go ahead and check out the review. And then Of Darkness and Light, that is going up to the top of S tier. That was absolutely fantastic. It's everything I want in a fantasy book. Dragon Mage, that's going to be another S tier book. So this felt like classic fantasy with a modern writing style, has one of the most likable protagonists I've ever met, and there's a few times I thought I knew where it was going, but it did a good job of subverting my expectations. Next up is J.V. Hilliard's The Last Keeper. Unfortunately, that's going to end up in the D category for me. I felt there's too many POVs with too little time spent with each one and way too long between returning to them. At one point in the middle of the book, I was on a point of view character and I was trying to figure out who he was and how he related to the story. And when I did finally figure it out, he was the main character. So halfway through the book, I had forgotten the name of the main character. Not an ideal situation. Next is Wistful Ascending. And let's reorganize this a little bit. Wistful Ascending is a superhero space opera that I did not expect to like. It was picked for me to read. I didn't choose it. But it was a fantastic pick. I ended up loving the whole book. I really liked the humor in it, and it really opened my eyes to how much I liked superhero fantasies. When I read Wistful Ascending, the only other superhero fantasy I had read was Villain's Code by Drew Hayes, and I thought that was going to be the exception and not the rule. But now I'm not so sure about that. Next, you have Winds of Strife. I'm going to put this also in A tier. One of the coolest magic systems, not to mention one of the best covers I've seen. This is another one I have a full review on, so if you want to know more about what makes it A tier, not S tier, go ahead and check out the review. The next series is the Fred the Vampire Account series, and I binged all 8 of these, so it's kind of hard going off of memory of which title goes with which storyline. So I do have some notes to make sure I get these in the order I wanted them. So Book 1, The Utterly Uninteresting and Unadventurous Tales of Fred the Vampire Accountant. That goes in the bottom of A tier. So this introduced you to Fred and was just such a unique take on fantasy and just a joy to read. Book 2, similar to Split the Party, I felt it lost some of its charm from between Book 1 and Book 2. It was no longer this unique story, so I needed a little bit more in order to maintain the same rating. Book 3 improved a bit from Book 2, but still B tier. Book 4, this was one of the first ones that was like, okay, this is getting better. So that's going to go up in A tier. Book 5 was one of my favorites in the series, so that's going to be farther up in A tier. Book 6, bit of a letdown after Book 5. Book 5, there was a lot of tension in it. And then Book 7, this is, again, a lot of tension rising in book 7. And book 8, there just wasn't as much going on. The storyline was much more contained than the other books that I've rated higher. All right, the next series is the Crydic Sagas. There's 3 books. Started off as a solid B, then dropped down to a low B, and then the last book I'm putting in the C category. I liked the first story, and I know a lot of people say that the books get better as they go. For me, I was getting kind of more and more bored with the story as it was going on, and that was dropping my ratings. Next, Cold from the North. This is also going in the D category, which I hate doing that. And I know several people who absolutely love this book, so don't take my word for it. Go ahead and check the book out. I was enjoying the beginning, although I did feel the dialogue was a bit clunky. And then about halfway through, the pacing of the book just comes to a screeching halt. And I was never able to get back into it after then. The next series is the Dark Prophet Saga, starting with Orconomics. This is going to be a high B tier. Let's actually rearrange these a little bit. It took me about half the book to get into Orconomics, but the second half I really enjoyed. Son of a Lich, or Son of a Leech, not sure how to pronounce it. It also took me about half the book to get into this one, so I'm going to move it down to C tier, but it was about twice as long as Orconomics. So it took a lot of work for me to get to that second half of the story before I enjoyed it. Next book was another early self-pub book for me, and that was The Broken Heart of Aurelium. Put that as C tier. This book was very fast-paced, except for when it became a massive info dump. So parts of it were moving way too fast. Then it would come to a screeching halt, info dump, then speed through the next section, another info dump. For that reason, I can't rate it any higher than C. Rise of the Ranger. I'm putting this at C. I'll put it towards the front of C. I felt there might have been a good story in the book, but I couldn't see it because of the narration. And I hate judging a book based on a bad narration. But if the narration ruins my enjoyment, unfortunately, the book is going to take the hit for that. Just like if you were reading a book and you had to squint to read, you wouldn't enjoy the process of reading that book, even if it was a good story. The Written. This will also be at the front of C category. It's another one I have a review for, so go ahead and check that out. I felt the pacing was a bit too fast, and I had to do a lot of rereads to understand what happened. A Touch of Light. So this is going to go in B tier. A lot of people would put this in A or S tier. For me, I was struggling to follow along with what was going on. Now, part of that could very well be what was going on in my life at that time, and I just didn't have the right focus for the book. But my experience reading it for the first time, B tier. Maybe a reread will move it up, but for now, it's going to stay at B. The Seventh Cadence. This is also going to be B tier. This was another quality book. For me, the pacing was just slower than what my preference is, and that kind of kept it down. But I do think the world building is pretty cool. The plot is certainly interesting, and I'm still looking forward to book 2 coming out. All right, getting down to the end. We have the Swordsman's Lament. Put this at the very bottom of A tier. Nice short story. Not as swashbuckling as I was hoping for, but still really good. Then we have Wyrd Gods. Book 1 of the Timelessness series, I believe. So I'm going to move this to C category. This was about a god that loses their godliness, and there's seems to be some type of war or maneuvering going on between the gods and the titans, if I'm remembering right. And it was, I know it's titled Wyrd Gods, but the story was pretty weird to me, and there was times where it was hard for me to follow along, but still interesting. And this is another one I do still plan on continuing the series at some point. And the last book on the list, certainly not least, is going to be The Legend of Black Jack by A.R. Witham. Just an absolutely fantastic book, a joy to read, and good for all ages. All right, let's do a little bit of rearranging here. So I think I'm pretty happy with this list and the order now. Out of the 47 books, 5 S tier, another 14 A tier, and I think 17 B tier. That's a really good spread towards the top. And I've said several times that Sullivan and Hayes are 2 of my favorite authors, and they have books in this B category. So if there's something in this B category, it's with good company. And if there's any on here that you would like me to do a more thorough review for that I don't have on the channel yet, let me know and I'll see if I can do that. And also leave me a comment with a self-pub book that you would recommend I check out. And until next time, bye.